Alrighty, are we live? Can everybody hear me? Ah, brilliant. Oh, g'day guys. The beaches of South Carolina. Ah, it must be cold. Is it cold this time of year in South Carolina? Hey guys, this is good. Affirmative, we're all loud and clear today. This is good. This is probably the best start I've had. Touch wood. While we're waiting for a few more people to join us, has everyone seen the new that new Star Wars clip with the tread bikes chasing the skiff? Man, that was gold. The first thing I thought of when I saw that scene with the flying jetpacks was, I wonder how many stormtroopers they killed testing that product. Because it doesn't seem like a very user-friendly thing to be flying on a bike and then have someone behind you with a jet propulsion device within close proximity to your head suddenly flying off the back of your bike. But anyway, it was gold. And then I watched the full clip. Was it yesterday with the they can fly, they can fly, they can fly. It's like poetry. Before we get started today, I wasn't planning to, but I thought I'd briefly talk about Watchman. I don't know if anyone's been watching Watchman. Who watches the Watchman? But man, what a mess that show has become. And I can't believe it, because unlike some people, I defended Damien Lindelof. His name sounds like a Swedish chocolate factory, but I defended you, Damien. You were my brother, Anakin. I actually really liked a series that he did a couple of years ago called The Leftovers, and I thought it was it wasn't perfect, but I thought it was some pretty interesting themes in there, and it sort of didn't stay in the shallow end of the pool. It sort of tried to delve a little bit deeper into some of those big themes around the question of, is there a God? Where is God? Science, technology, a naturalistic understanding of the world versus a supernatural understanding of the world. For those who haven't seen The Leftovers, basically it was it's based on a book, and the book is more sort of satirical black comedy, really, but the series took itself a lot more seriously, the TV series. And you have this event. Basically, it's I can't remember the exact number, but it's a large percentage, not a large percentage, a percentage of the population just suddenly one day, g'day Bramblebush, suddenly just disappear. They're just gone. So some families lose everyone except for one person in the family. They all just disappear, and no one knows why they've disappeared. And the show never really goes into great detail to explain why. That's not the point. The point is not to explain why this event has happened and why all these people around the globe have just disappeared. The show's about the aftermath and how people deal with the sudden loss of population that is mysterious, that's frightening. No one knows why it's happened. These people just disappeared and gone. And it's fascinating as a show, and I thought it was relatively well written. So then along comes The Watchman, and man, what a mess. Like, the episode 5, so last week's episode, was the first really compelling episode of that show that there's been. And it was interesting. It focused on an interesting story point, interesting piece of character development. And then this week, we are straight back into this sort of ham-fisted, ideological, whatever it is they're doing, I don't know. But it's just, man, it's so frustrating. Because you see with episode 5 last week, you see the potential of what this show could have been. But so far, and it's so, I think it's so exploitative too. I mean, it's about as subtle as a brick, trying to do the whole theme of race relations, but I think making a real mess of it. On Sunday night, I watched a newish documentary movie about the final months of Martin Luther King Jr., and it's a really good documentary. And then Monday night, I watched, it was like Thanos snapping his finger in that series. I watched, on Monday night, I then watched this latest episode of The Watchman, and it's this ham-fisted attempt. It's like it leaves a sour taste in your mouth after having watched what is a really good documentary about the final sort of months of Martin Luther King's life, and it delves really deeply into the whole civil rights thing and race relations, and importantly, Martin Luther King Jr.'s principle of non-violence and this whole idea of, his wholesale rejection of identity politics, that it was all about actually trying to bring people together under this one common identity, that we're all children of God, basically, that we have a common humanity. And this show is the exact opposite. And man, it's just so ham-fisted. Very frustrating because, as I said, it's a mess. An absolute mess. Last week, compelling episode. This week, not so good. Anyway, that's enough about the Watchman. So thank you, may the pulp be with you, who says, I'd rather hear you talk about Star Wars than watch any new Star Wars. Wouldn't it be great if it was the other way around? People would rather watch Star Wars than hear me talk about it. That would be awesome. Okay, let's look at this interview. So for those, I'm just going to go through this interview that Kathleen Kennedy did now. It is supposed to be an alternate reality in The Watchmen, but they've made a mess of it. It's just the writing and the ham-fisted nature of it, so one-dimensional. Just lacks any sort of nuance or subtlety, and just not good. So I thought we'd just read through this. The two main topics I want to talk about today in the live stream is I want to talk about the Kathleen Kennedy interview that she did with Rolling Stone. So I thought we'd just work through that interview, and I'd sort of share my comments as we browse the pages of Rolling Stone. And then after that, we would talk about The Mandalorian now that episode 3 has arrived. What do I think now? You know, if you're a watcher of my channel, you know I had some critiques of the first 2 episodes. So what do I think now? Where are things at? And I just thought I'd sort of have a bit more of an overview of The Watchmen. Sorry, not The Watchmen, of The Mandalorian. So anyway, this Rolling Stone article, if you want to follow along with me on your screen, if you want to follow along at home on your own devices, I've put the link in the description for this video for the Rolling Stone interview, so you can just click on it, and I thought we'd just read through it together. So I'm sure some of you, or a lot of you, may have already read it, but anyway, here we go. Lucasfilm's Kathleen Kennedy on Rise of Skywalker and the Future of Star Wars. So I want to start with the introduction by the journalist who wrote it, because there's actually a really important point in here that's worth highlighting. Actually, before I even jump into that, let me say this. I don't hate Kathleen Kennedy, and I don't think anyone should hate Kathleen Kennedy. I don't think you should hate anyone. I really don't think. I think hatred of other people is not a good thing. And I'm not just saying that because of my religious beliefs, and my Christian belief that, there should be a general respect for the human dignity of other persons, and that, I take the whole idea of not hating other people seriously, even people who might do ill will to you. But I think also the fact that, it's so superficial to say I hate someone because they made a bad television, a bad film, or a couple of bad films, or they made a mess of one of my favorite film franchises. To me, it's it's an extreme, over the top reaction. There's no reason to hate, even for the mistakes that have been made. So we fight for what we love. Well said, Jeremiah. So I don't hate Kathleen Kennedy. I want to put that out there now. And I don't think anyone should really be hating on Kathleen Kennedy. I don't think that's a good reaction. But I think it is quite fair and legitimate to have what you might call a constructive critical eye cast over what's happened. And I think that's a good thing. Anything in life where you're going to have self-improvement, it only comes first when you diagnose the problem and when you're honest about the problem. And I think we can do that. So, I'm not interested in starting a hate session at all. I just want to talk about this interview in particular, and I guess in the light of where Star Wars is at. Okay, so there's an interesting point here in this opening little précis that the journalist has written. I'll read it to you. Lucasfilm President Kathleen Kennedy may well be the most powerful woman in Hollywood. I wonder, is she the most powerful woman in Hollywood? I wonder if that's actually Meryl Streep. I could be wrong about that, but yeah, I suppose from a administrative standpoint she is. And she's hardly a newcomer to the world of blockbusters, serving as Steven Spielberg's producer since 1982's E.T., and that's true. She has a really good pedigree in this arena. There's no doubting her credentials. That partnership extended to Spielberg's collaborations on the Indiana Jones movies with George Lucas, who anointed Kennedy as his successor in 2012 as he negotiated a sale to Disney. As guardian of the Star Wars universe, Kennedy has needed every ounce of her experience, never hesitating to swap out creative teams. Now, that's an interesting point there. never hesitating to swap out creative teams. And we'll come back to that when they ask the first question of her in just a moment, because that's actually a problem. It's being phrased in this interview, the start of this interview, as if it's a really good positive thing, swapping out the creative teams. But here's the thing. It's such a constant theme of this new Disney Star Wars that I think you'd have to say that there's a problem here. Something's not right when you're constantly having to change your management teams and you're hiring the wrong people, clearly. I would have thought that's what that's an indicator of. But anyway, where are we? Kennedy has needed every ounce of experience, never hesitating to swap out creative teams, even mid-movie when necessary. Again, I don't think that's a good thing. As on 2018's commercial disappointment Solo. Now, that's an interesting statement, isn't it? Swapped out the team, and the next minute we're describing that project as a commercial disappointment. That really tells you everything. In October, 2 weeks before Game of Thrones, David Benioff and D.B. Wise pulled out of a 2-year deal to develop a new Star Wars trilogy. Kennedy called Rolling Stone to discuss December 20th Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, and a post-Skywalker saga cinematic future for the franchise that remains wide open, even as Last Jedi director Rian Johnson and Marvel's Kevin Feige develop potential films. Now, this is the interesting point in this statement. Let me go back to it again. I'll read you the most important thing there. In October, 2 weeks before Game of Thrones, David Benioff and D.B. Wise pulled out of a 2-year deal to develop a new Star Wars trilogy. Kathleen Kennedy called the Rolling Stone. That's the key point. She contacted the journalists. This, and I have experience, for those who don't know, who might be new to my channel, I have experience, and I'm still involved in some sectors in media and communications, and that often crosses over into the boundaries of PR. And I can tell you right now that this is a classic PR move here, where it's called controlling the narrative, where you don't wait for the story to be told about you. You don't wait for the story to be told about what's going on with your corporation. You get out ahead of the story and you contact journalists and you make sure that you spin the narrative and tell them what you think they need to hear about the situation. And so the fact that she wasn't waiting around, they didn't ring her, she rang them and said, I want to talk. That's quite important. And it's a really telling sign that there's definitely have been and are changes happening in Disney, probably internally. And it's also a clear indication that finally it's somehow caught up with the corporation, that outside in the real world with all of us normies, the simple folk who go to theatres and expect just basic good storytelling and well-made movies, that I think the message has finally got through the ivory tower up on the 11th floor that, okay, there is a problem here. And we need to actually get out there and we need to control the narrative. We need to put some spin on this because it's not good. So that's quite an important point. For a lot of people, they probably would have missed that, just would have sort of... And remember, this is 2 weeks before Benioff and Wise. It says here they pulled out. But realistically, I think probably anyone who's anyone is probably going to actually assume that they were pushed rather than jumped. And probably it was encouraged. They said, look, we're going to rejig some things at Star Wars. Almost certainly Bob Iger's probably said, we're going to rejig a few things here at Star Wars. Benioff and Wise, here's the deal. I can allow you to save face. I'm not going to carry on with the current trajectory, but here's a chance for you to save face, and you get to say to everyone that you pulled out, and then it looks good for you. And so both of us achieve the ends that we want. You know, we get to move away from that current trajectory that I guess Kathleen Kennedy had planned, or the previous team had planned, and you also get to save face. We don't say we fired you or sacked you or anything like that. You know, your career doesn't get too damaged by saying you pulled out. So, and as I said, the fact that she's contacted the Rolling Stone it's classic controlling of the narrative. The best thing, whenever I do media training for groups or individuals, I always tell them the best situation to be in is when you are breaking the story, not when the story is being broken about you. So when you're breaking the news, as in you are the one going to the media with the story, you have more control and you are being proactive. The worst thing you can do in any sort of PR or media engagement is to be reactive, to have everything happening to you and have journalists constantly hounding you and saying, why is this happening? What's going on here? And have everyone surmising what they think is happening. So she's definitely trying to get out ahead of something here. And you can't fault her for that. That's very, very clever PR and a very, very clever media strategy. as Jeremiah McDonald said, it's damage control. And it seems pretty clear now, especially since we've heard that Jon Favreau is going to be more involved. I'll talk more about that when I talk about The Mandalorian, because that's actually, there's quite a clever, there's some really clever corporate chess that's being played here right now by Disney, considering the situation they're in with Star Wars around the whole Lucasfilm thing. And we'll talk about that when we talk about The Mandalorian. Anyway, so the first question she's asked is this. Jurassic World director Colin Trevorrow was slated to write and direct episode 9 before you brought J.J. Abrams back in. Is this final entry in the trilogy a particularly hard nut to crack? Now, this is interesting because it's not just Colin Trevorrow. We had issues with Rogue One, which has been the best of the films that they've made so far. But even on Rogue One, there were massive reshoots. And the original version of that film, apparently, according to the screenwriter who was brought in to do the reshoots and do the rewrites, it was a mess. And it's amazing that they salvaged and produced what is the best of any of the Disney films so far. That's quite amazing, really, when you think about it, for a film that was in that state. So we had that. We had Solo, Lord and Miller. You have this one here. You have the whole situation with the trilogy, the Disney trilogy, where they didn't keep consistency of writing teams. So to me, this points to a problem here that if you were on any other, imagine another corporation, I don't know, let's say a corporation that manufactures farming machinery, and every project, some new tractor, some new plough, they kept replacing the manager in charge of the project. So they would hire someone and then sack them and get someone new. You would have to say there's something wrong with the decision making at the very top of that corporation. They're not actually making a wise decision at the beginning, surely, if it's a consistent pattern that keeps happening. And I think that's one thing that hasn't really been acknowledged here, is the fact that this is a pattern which points to some failures at the very top in the decision making process. If you have to keep replacing people, it means you're not making wise decisions. And of course, I think one of the biggest and most unwise decisions was Rian Johnson. Really. We'll talk more about that in a minute anyway. So anyway, she responds to this question by saying, every one of these movies is a particularly hard nut to crack. There's no source material. What? Say what there? There's no source material. Ah, what? Sorry. I didn't hear you correctly, because I thought you said for a minute there was no source material, but you wouldn't have said there's no source material, right? Oh, you did say there's no source material. She doubles down on this. We don't have comic books. We don't have 800-page novels. We don't have anything other than passionate storytellers who get together and talk about the next iteration, what the next iteration might be. Yeah, no, that's not true at all. You had so much source material. Here's the thing. There was a ton of, everyone knows this. There was a trilogy of books. Right, we're back. There was a ton of source material. Can everyone hear me all right? We're still here? I think we're still on. Righty. Okay, so there was a ton of source material. And as I said, they didn't have an 800-page novel. You had an entire trilogy, the Thrawn trilogy, that was just begging for a movie adaptation. But you wiped all of that out. Now, I get it. I understand why you did that, because you wanted total creative control. You wanted the freedom to be able to create any cinematic story you wanted to without all of that existing canon hanging over your head. And you know, because imagine if you'd written some really great first film, new start to that trilogy. The Force Awakens was amazing. You'd had some new movie that was amazing. And then you'd discover that the major plot point in that film was already in contradiction with another piece of canon that existed. That would be a disaster. You know, you have to go back and rewrite the whole film, or, you know, like that. So to avoid that problem, those kind of problems, you wiped all the canon. So I understand what you were thinking there. But here's the thing, even though you wiped all that canon to give yourself creative freedom, the canon still exists. Those documents, those pieces of content, those creative efforts, they still exist. It would be like, I don't know, an engineering company that's got some amazing diagnostic on the whiteboard, and someone's taken a photograph of it on their phone and printed it out, and then they wipe it off the whiteboard, and then saying, oh, we've got no source material to go with. All you have to do is look at the diagram again and take the bits that you want and reassemble them how you want, put them back on the board. So they could have pulled things out of those books. Those books are still real. They still exist in the real world. The comics, the storylines from video games, the short stories, the trilogies. There's tons of stuff they could have drawn from. So you could have brought that old canon that you'd wiped back in, bits of it that you wanted. So simple. This is not rocket science. It was all there. You also had the original trilogy and the prequels, which give you a whole lot of source concepts. Even, you can't just remake those. We'll get onto that in a second. But there's concepts there. That's all there. The world building's all been done for you. That's easy, really, from that point. It's like, okay, how do we slot some new characters into this existing world building? And it was all there. The source material was absolutely there. This is just insane. And the end result of all of that, though, after wiping all of that source material so you could produce new and creative output, was you gave us The Force Awakens, which was a blatant rip-off of A New Hope, and it's got some truly bizarre decisions in it. I'm going to talk about one of them next week on my video next Monday around Han Solo. But things like the Resistance and the Republic, what the heck is, like, it's just not even it's not even well crafted. People saying, oh, the Jedis were real, all of that happened. Of course it all happened. Everyone would know that story about the destruction, the downfall of the Emperor. What do you think? People are wandering around saying, oh, I heard Darth Vader and the Emperor died of food poisoning. Like, everyone would know that story. It was just insane. Oh no, I heard he fell down a shaft. I heard he was doing an inspection on the Death Star, and as he fell, he grabbed Lord Vader, and they both tumbled down the hole together. No Jedi's involved there. So that was the end result. So you destroy everything, and then you just do a blatant rip-off, and then of course along comes The Last Jedi. So this is insane. I think this is a bad example of trying to control the narrative, where you're trying to give an excuse. And this is often what happens. This is so much of this interview. This is often what happens in corporations or in any organization where the people in charge are they're in charge of a situation that's crumbling or spiraling out of control, or mistakes are being made. And once those mistakes start to cement, you can do one of two things. You own the mistakes and you say, how do we fix this? Which is not as easy as you think. I've been in leadership of teams and of organizations. I run my own organization now, actually. And it's not easy to actually admit that you're walking down a wrong trajectory, you're making mistakes. It's a really hard thing to do. It takes a lot of courage and a lot of overcoming our own basic human nature. So the more common thing that people do is they just lean into the mistakes and try and excuse it all and give reasons for why it happened. And that's what she's doing here. She's just giving these justifications. But to say there was no source material is just, it's blatantly untrue. So the choice I'm left with here is that she's either not telling the truth, or in charity, I would assume that maybe she doesn't know as much about Star Wars as everyone thought she did. And that's a possibility. Or is this like Chairman Mao? When Chairman Mao takes power, what does he do? Wipes out everything that's come before. Was it Pol Pot? I can't remember which one. Wiped out everything that came before and said, now is year zero. There is no previous history. Maybe that's how they view it. I don't know. But this just is nonsense. She then says, we go through a really normal development process that everyone else does. You start by talking to filmmakers who you think exhibit the sensibilities you're looking for. That's obviously what you should do, right? But then they didn't do that. They kept sacking filmmakers and hiring someone, then sacking them and hiring them and then rewriting the finished film. And this just, again, so that speaks to me that the process itself was flawed. There's problems there, and bad decisions were being made. And I would argue that list is very small of people who could do that, people who really do have the sensibilities about these kind of movies, and then the experience and the ability to handle how enormous a job these movies are. I agree. So my question when I first read that was, my first thought was, okay, thank you, Don, for clarifying. It was Chairman Mao who wiped out history. Okay, so my first thought when I read that was, okay, so did anyone approach Christopher Nolan? Did they? Because right there, you have a filmmaker who is tailor-made, who is pitch perfect, who has got everything you need to make for you a phenomenal trilogy. Him and his brother, they write it. He makes it. it would have been unbelievable. Was he approached? I mean, I don't know. I've never seen any indication that he ever approached. I made a video about this, I think about a year and a half ago, about how Nolan should have been given a Star Wars film. I don't even know if he was approached. Was he? Was Peter Jackson approached? I mean, I don't know if he would have said yes, but it'd be interesting to find out who they actually approached. Because, I mean, clearly Jackson has proved he's got the competence for this sort of thing. He features on that Star Wars making of Empire of Dreams, the documentary too, talking about his love of and admiration for what Lucas did. So it's interesting. I'd love to know who they actually approached. I suspect they knew that that's what they needed, but they were very selective in what they were looking for, and perhaps they were too narrow. I'll skip a bit here. She says, it's been an evolving process with lots of people and lots of opinions, and then you try to shape something into what eventually becomes. So I really feel fortunate that I've worked with so many great people that have been absolutely committed, JJ being one of them. Well, JJ really is her lieutenant. He's her top general now. Or top lieutenant in the army. She's got to really stick with him, and she does that here. He's a huge fan, incredibly passionate about Star Wars, and has been from the moment he and I sat down and started talking about this. And the more he got involved, the more excited he became. So I think if you asked him today, he'd probably wishes he'd been in a situation where he could have done all 3 films. But as I said, these are huge projects, so it's very difficult unless there's 3 or 4 years in between. It's not been physically possible. The reason there's not 3 or 4 years between is because you made the decision to pump out the film so quickly. So, and this is the thing, we know, I don't believe you can hire directors. You can hire directors, writer directors, creative teams to stay on a trilogy. You just got to make the right offer. Make them an offer they can't refuse. Look at what Peter Jackson did with the Lord of the Rings. He committed, over a decade to those 3 films. Look at the difference and the final creative artifact that is brought into the world with the Lord of the Rings trilogy compared to what's going on with the Disney trilogy. So to me, this sounds like a really, really bad attempt at an excuse making. Oh, we couldn't really get JJ committed for that long, the films, they come out so close together. Yeah, but that's your decision. You don't have to have them coming out so close together. Next question, what strikes you about how he and his co-screenwriter, Chris Terrio, did manage to crack the nut for this one? She says this, Chris is a very, very thoughtful, intelligent guy that JJ chose and we all got to know. And again, it went through much of what we often go through. Now, before I go on, this is interesting. Chris Terrio, I look at his resume, and Chris Terrio, yeah, he's got what I call some good films, but he's still at the new end of the spectrum. And it's interesting. It seems they've gone for a particular type of filmmaker. Outside of J.J. Abrams, they really seem to be going to people who are very much perhaps more malleable. I don't know, and I wonder why. Is it a deliberate decision where they said, well, let's go for people who've got a little bit of experience, but they're a bit younger, they're a bit newer in the game? Is it because this is a strategy on their part, or is it because they're the only people who are willing to say yes? The more experienced screenwriters and directors aren't so keen, especially after what they've seen now? I don't know. It made me wonder. Anyway, we go through the process we often go through, which is endless discussion, lots of artwork. Now, this is that point stuck out to me. Does she mean that they sit around and create the artwork before they write the story? Because she's talking about story writing process here, remember, and the creation process. Or does she mean that the artwork comes after they've written the story? Because it should be after. If you're starting with the artwork, that's a very telling point. You're starting with all the flash and the pizzazz. That's like making a cake by starting with the icing, plonking the icing on a plate and say, right, now how are we going to get a cake underneath this thing? You start with the cake. The cake's the story. Then the icing, the artistry goes on top of that, the visual artistry. So it stuck out to me. Anyway, there we go. JJ had already been into a pretty deep dive before he was doing Force Awakens and during the process of that movie. It's almost like an education of getting acquainted with all aspects of Star Wars. You mean the ones that don't exist? And interestingly, JJ did such a deep dive into Star Wars that he decided just to copy the original film. He was so deep that he forgot that this story already existed. Hey guys, I've got an idea. There is a mega weapon. We'll call it the Death Planet. It floats around in space. It's a sphere. Blows up other planets. Amazing. No one's seen this before. No one does Star Wars like I do Star Wars. This is just unbelievable. And here she goes on. Not only just looking at the movies, but talking to the number of people that are still around that worked with George for years, understanding the mythology that he created, which is interesting. I don't know. Look at what Rian Johnson did. Did he really understand the mythology with the way Luke was treated? I think that's a bit of a stretch. But anyway, one of the things we talked about all the time is the fact that it was very important to George that these stories really meant something, that they have something to say, and that they have a real emotional core. And of those three things, that they meant something, that they have something to say, and that they have real emotional core, the only one they fulfilled on was that these films have something to say. They stacked them full of propaganda messaging. Here's something we want to tell you about how we think the world should be. What they failed, though, was that these stories mean something, they have meaning, and they have an emotional core. It's missing from the Disney trilogy. So they failed on the only one they got right was, here, we're going to tell you something, we're going to preach at you. So we spent a lot of time talking about that and trying to find the spine of a story that feels satisfying. When you're dealing, as I said, with something where you don't necessarily have any source material, again, doubling down, that's clearly a talking point here. They've decided, how do we get out ahead of this and do a little bit of damage control? Let's say let's tell everyone that we sort of, you can't blame us. We just sort of did our best. We had no source material. By the way, unless you are making a film from a book, everyone has no source material when they write a film. That's how writing works. Everyone who writes a book has no source material before they write the book. They start from scratch. George Lucas had no source material when he wrote the first Star Wars film. Ghostbusters, no source material. This is how filmmaking works. So it's such a bizarre excuse anyway. When you're dealing with something where you don't have any source material, then you're looking for a filmmaker who has a strong point of view, who can find themselves in the characters and in the story. That's what drives the momentum of the storytelling. And I think JJ is a perfect example of that. He can do anything without his energy and enthusiasm becoming very much a part of the storytelling. He can do anything without his... So he's very fun to be in a room with when you're trying to break story, because he does have that amazing energy and enthusiasm, and he's funny, and that always helps. We spend a lot of time laughing. That to me is written like it sounds like just a classic piece of PR. It was great. Everything was amazing. It was the best time ever. It was just we went over to Iraq and we took some soldiers over to Iraq, and it was nothing but it was all fun and giggles. And the people of Iraq loved us, and the end result was an amazingly stable region. It's PR speak to me. That's what that sounds like. Okay, next question. How did you get to the point where you felt, we got this right? Well, we've got this right with the story of episode 9. And this is an interesting response. While I wouldn't say you ever get to a point where you just go, that's it, it's a constantly evolving process. I mean, there's still little things that we're trying to get exactly right now. This is sort of interesting to me, because surely, though, there is a point at which you say, that's it, that's the story. Let's make that film. And then as you go, you might discover little things, a few little reshoots. So you think, I'm not 100% satisfied with that. It looked good on paper, but it's not quite working here. So give us a quick rewrite of that piece of dialogue. Things like that. Or you put the final edits and go, we need an extra scene here because just to explain this thing, there's some bridging that's missing. That kind of stuff. But to say, we never had a moment where we got the story, I don't know. Something's wrong with the storytelling process, isn't it? Pragmatic cynicism says, Rian Johnson definitely understood the mythology. That's how he was able to make everything as stupid as possible. He did it on purpose. You are living up to your name, pragmatic cynicism. We know what that story is. So in this movie, we're talking all of what's come before, and we're trying to find a satisfying conclusion. And I think we have, and that's something we can only depend on our instincts to arrive at, whether or not we have. And then we have what I would call the family and friends that you pull in and you show things to when you try and get some kind of feedback and make sure that you're making sense and that you're delivering on the things that you intend. That's something we're still talking about right now. Now, here's the thing. I'm skeptical about whether those family and friends that they've brought in during this creative process to give them feedback are actually independent enough of the system to give honest feedback. This is what you call George Lucas syndrome, or prequel syndrome, where George Lucas had become so powerful And you see it in the making of documentary. It's fascinating when those fly on the wall scenes where that creative process is happening, and no one's actually critiquing George Lucas. They're just all agreeing with them. And you can see, even it looks like some of them are uncomfortable with some of these decisions, but no one's saying anything because they don't have the power to say anything. So unless you're bringing in like Martin Scorsese into the room, I mean, not necessarily him, but someone of that caliber who is so independent of the system, they don't need the system anymore. And they can just give you honest feedback. I don't know if you're actually going to get a great piece of constructive criticism to allow you to make a better film. Next question. Rian Johnson made some controversial choices in episode 8, The Last Jedi. Well, that's one way of putting it. Especially considering its dramatic purpose as the second movie in the trilogy. Were you, to an extent, deliberately setting out to challenge fans and their expectations? Oh gosh, that's a good question. It's actually like, funnily enough, this journalist has actually asked a good question. It's taken us all this time for someone in the media to ask a good question on that topic. And she says this: we definitely did. We're talking all the time about how we move Star Wars forward and how we keep it relevant. Well, quite frankly, if that was the conversation before The Last Jedi, you failed. This is how you make a film irrelevant. This is how you make a franchise irrelevant, by doing what you did with that film. That's not how to keep it relevant. Obviously, we don't want to just keep making the same movie over and over again. You mean like you did with The Force Awakens? This isn't making sense. So I agree with you. I mean, I love what Rian did. It's an absolutely wonderful movie. I think he's an extraordinary filmmaker, and I really appreciated the bold moves that he did make. Of course she does, because Rian, I think it seems to me the way she has responded all the way through this, that Rian was probably one of her preferred hires, perhaps, or she was very involved in that process because she stuck very closely to him. Again, this is what I said before, often happens in corporations. When mistakes start happening, they start mounting up, and all of a sudden you realize you're swimming through treacle, and one mistake is compounded onto another, and it's a very courageous and skilled, I think, leader to stop and say, yeah, we're making big mistakes here, we need to stop what we're doing here and just admit it. What happens more commonly is human nature takes over, and you start leaning into the mistakes and giving justifications and defending everything, and that's what she's doing here. And this is kind of frustrating because one of the things about Rian Johnson is, like, I like Looper, by the way. I think Looper's a good film, an enjoyable film. It's in my movie collection. But the Last Jedi was terrible, and I don't think that Rian Johnson, even though he's made, he has made a good film in Looper, that doesn't necessarily mean that everything he does is good, or that he's all of a sudden is a great filmmaker. To become a great filmmaker, you have to have a lineage. There has to be a legacy, something that is crafted over time, and that's what he doesn't have. And so all this talk about him being an extraordinary filmmaker, and it's a wonderful movie, for some reason, Rian Johnson, even in interviews I've seen where they've asked him, like, is there anything you'd change about The Last Jedi? It's like, nope, everything's perfect. Like, it's kind of weird. There's almost like, a lack of awareness or an ego or something. And so it just sort of feeds that problem when you say, it was amazing, he's the best filmmaker ever. Just sort of enabling some bad behavior, basically. I think people forget that, especially when you're doing a trilogy structure, the first movie is setting things up, and the second is usually the conflict, and the third is the resolution. Yes. So what happened to the second film? Again, no one's forgotten that. Everyone knows that point. No one has forgotten that point. But what happened? Because it didn't happen with The Last Jedi. So you're bound to have that second movie, much the same way Empire Strikes Back was. Here we go, trying to make a comparison that is not valid with Empire again. Very much the same way Empire Strikes Back was, probably the darkest and most dramatic of the three. I don't know if it's the most dramatic. It's definitely the darkest. I don't know if it's the most dramatic. I think of that final conflict in Return of the Jedi, and there's a lot of tension and drama in that, and the story really does come to a sort of quite a compelling final act in that film. But it is certainly the darkest, and it is the best Star Wars film that's ever been made. We talked about it with Indiana Jones. We did Raiders of the Lost Ark, and then we did Temple of Doom, which was dark and created a lot of controversy, and people were surprised at where it went with the storytelling, but frankly, that's the whole point. Well, no, here's the thing. Those three films, they are not an overarching trilogy where it's like a story that starts in one and then concludes in the final film. What you have is three independent stories that are told. It's one guy on three separate adventures. And the first film was awesome. The final film was phenomenal. The Temple of Doom, it's a watchable film. Nothing wrong with it. But it is, of the three, it is the weakest, interestingly. So it's interesting she's using that as her comparison point, because Temple of Doom was the weakest. And the complaints weren't really, it's interesting. I remember that film, and I remember the complaints about it. I remember being a kid, and it was like, well, we don't watch that one. You have to be older. And even with my own kids, I've got the Indiana Jones films in my collection, and that's the one film I have not shown them, and they're not old enough to see yet. I mean, you've got human sacrifice with hearts being ripped out of chests. There were some odd creative decisions that were made in that film. And, I could only guess that the filmmakers were going through a dark period in their personal lives. I wonder if it's an analogy for their relationship troubles. She took the beating heart from my chest and ripped it out. But yeah, that was the controversy. It's not like the controversy around The Last Jedi. You didn't have the character of Indiana Jones doing things in that film that were inconsistent with his character. He actually did things. He acted in a way that was totally consistent with Indiana Jones, by and large, in Temple of Doom. It wasn't like Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi, where suddenly you've got this new character who doesn't make sense, and Indiana Jones is suddenly doing things that he would never do. It's, and so I don't think that's a valid comparison at all. And it's an interesting comparison because, as I said, of the three films, it is the weakest. I love that we have these amazing, now this is an interesting point. I love that we have these amazingly passionate fans who care so much. And I know sometimes they may think we don't listen, but we do. And I thought it was fantastic that people got that engaged. It just showed me and everybody else how much they care. And that's important for all of us that are doing this. We really look at them as the custodians of the story as much as we are. We look at it as a kind of partnership. I struggle to believe that. I struggle to believe that. Does anyone else here, hands up, who else struggles to believe that they really view us, the fans, as partners with them, that they appreciated the critique? I mean, just think about, this is now a total contradiction to what she's just said. I'll go back to what she said about The Last Jedi. It's an absolutely wonderful movie. And then she says, I love, she says, I thought it was fantastic these people got engaged. Just showed me everyone else how much they care, and it's important for all of us. We really look at them as the custodians of the story. Well, which is it? Because the so-called custodians of the story, they told you very loudly that this was a bad story, The Last Jedi. But you start by saying it was an extraordinary film. It's a wonderful movie. So which is it? Were the custodians right, or are you right? Both of those things can't exist in concert together. So, do you really listen to them or not? I struggle to believe that. To me, that's a classic PR talking point. They've sat down and they've said, okay, how do we actually, Jeremiah, I got a handwritten letter from Kennedy just today. Okay, we'll care to share? How do we spin this? That clearly there are some, I'm kind of encouraged by that statement, because I don't believe that it's true. They really do have, they certainly haven't in the past. But what's clearly it tells me is that the talking heads, the fish heads at Disney Corporation have realized you've got a really unhappy fan base here, and you've got to do something to actually reach out to them. You've got to throw them a bone. And so this is their attempt at trying to reach out. It's not a particularly good one, but it is an attempt at it, and that's a positive sign. It makes me realise that they do know at Disney that they've got problems here with the fan base, that they're no longer sort of trying to pretend it's not real. They might not talk about it openly, but this is a roundabout way of saying we've got a problem with we've alienated a large section of the fan base, and it's not good. Next question. Only a couple more to go. Certainly, whatever comes after this, if it's unconnected to this Skywalker saga, that's one of the biggest challenges in the history of the franchise. Until now, pretty much everything has been in some ways connected to the original story. What are your thoughts on that? And then she says it's an incredible challenge. It's something that we're in the middle of, and I can't even begin to tell you where this may end up, because I don't think they know at this stage. Because I think you're absolutely right. I think whatever this next movie is and how it begins to define a new way forward, it's something that we want to take plenty of time and plenty of conversation and careful thought before deciding exactly what we're going to do. In other words, I've been told to just stop the horses, pull everything up, slow down, and we're going to have to go back to the drawing board. That's what that sounds like to me. Which makes sense. They are going to have to go back to the drawing board. But here's the thing. They've actually made a film already. This is not foreign to the Star Wars filmmaking. And funnily enough, Disney made that film. It was called Rogue One. Rogue One, okay, you've got a Skywalker in the background, Darth Vader, but this is not a film about the Skywalkers. It is connected to the original trilogy, that's for sure, but it's a film that doesn't feature, it features, again, Jedis and Jedi in the Force as a background theme. They're not central to it. It's the first film where the whole Jedi mythology is not core. It's not such a central part of the film. The storytelling all relies on it. You haven't got a young person being trained to be a Jedi. You haven't got a Skywalker as front and center of that film. And that film actually shows you can make a film. You can actually tell stories in the Star Wars universe that don't actually have to rely on this. So I don't think it's that new. It's a matter of just learning from that film. Don Draper says, so you want Star Wars to turn into Marvel where they have phony fanboy peeing on the source material as opposed to refusing to touch it? And I don't know. Interesting question. Next question. So you truly haven't yet decided what's next. So he's pressing the point here. No, we've got various things we're looking at and various ways in which we can begin or not, as you can imagine. Do you go back? Do you go forward? What do you mean, do you go back? Don't go back. Just stay away. Don't go back into what you've already done. There's not enough there with this Disney trilogy to go back into it. And there's you don't want to go near that original trilogy again. Just leave it alone. Just get away from it. Stay away. All those questions are being asked. Do we stay? And this is an interesting question. Do we stay in this galaxy? Do we go to another? What do you mean? Do you stay in this galaxy? What do you mean? Do you completely leave all of the existing world building that has been done in Star Wars and create something totally new, a brand new world, and just put Star Wars on top of that world and call it Star Wars? No, that's insane. That wouldn't be Star Wars anymore. Leave the galaxy. So in other words, do you mean leave all of the existing Star Wars world building? I'm assuming that's what that means. The universe is never ending. Laughs in parentheses. Laughs. The good news and the bad news. They have endless possibilities. It's liberating, it's exciting, and it creates a lot of pressure and anxiety as well. So which is it? We didn't have any source material and we don't have any source material and that was a real problem. Or it's liberating, it's exciting, there's endless possibilities. See the contradiction? How did Marvel's Kevin Feige come into the mix? Another important question. Kevin has been a huge fan of Star Wars and he's made that pretty clear. And I think when he went off to do a couple of the Spider-Man movies, he realized that he could kind of step in and out of what he's doing specifically with just Marvel. He talked to us and he talked to the studio and said, is there any chance I could step in and do one of those Star Wars movies? And I thought it was a pretty cool idea. So we're just beginning to talk about what that might be and when that might be, but it's a ways off. I think what's actually happened here is, again, this seems to be like controlling the narrative. I think what's happened is Bob Iger has said, okay, well, Kevin Feige's done a pretty good job with their other property over here, Marvel. Can you get him involved, please? I want him to help you out. I want him to do something here because we need to do something. Next question. Have you thought about how much longer you'd like to keep doing what you're doing? And good question. I've really enjoyed this. I have to say it's been incredibly exciting. And just the fact that George asked me to do this, I felt a tremendous responsibility with stepping in and taking care of the franchise. And if there were going to be new movies, to really pull a team around this that cared as much as he did. What happens in the future and how long and how much longer I do this, I don't know yet. I'm looking at all of that. It's been incredibly satisfying to reach this point where we've completed the saga and I think made a really wonderful movie. It's going to feel very satisfying to the audience. So that's what I'm focused on right at the moment. And what the future holds, who knows? That is a very interesting statement. If you know anything about media and communications, and particularly people who exist at the top of corporations and big organizations like this, these kind of statements are very telling. It's like politicians who make these kind of statements. It really is. It's kind of like someone who's prepping the ground for what could come next. It's like when someone says, you say, you're coming to my party on Saturday night, and they say, oh, look, I'd really love to be there, but I'm not sure. We've got some family things on. I'm not 100% sure. They are preparing the ground for Saturday night when they say to you, we're not coming. And so I think this is this very much, I think, would be a piece of narrative in control here, where she's perhaps indicating that she's not certain. It certainly seems to me this is someone who's uncertain whether they'll stick around. And possibly, and fair enough to her, she might have said, I've had enough of this. It's just too frustrating. I can't deal with all the heat. And you got to respect someone for making that kind of decision where they say, you know what, maybe I'm not the right person for this, or I can't take the pressure anymore. It's just getting to me in a way that's not good. So I'm going to make a decision that's good for me and my family. I'm going to move away from this. But it sounds like someone who's contemplating that. Because she's not saying, well, no, she's saying, who knows what the future holds when they ask her, what are you going to keep doing this? She hasn't said, well, we've got this film to complete, and then we've got another couple of things that we're looking at, and then we're having discussions at the moment about what comes next. She just says, who knows what the future holds? And it does seem that perhaps she's certainly contemplating leaving. Last two questions. Thanks to Bob Iger's new book, we now know in some detail about George Lucas's dissatisfaction with The Force Awakens. What are your feelings about that? Personally, I've had a relationship with George going back to all of us meeting before making Raiders of the Lost Ark. So this is a long 35 plus years, and I've known George, and I continue to be very, very good friends with George. And I think there's plenty of examples where people create something that is fundamental to who they are, and where it's difficult letting go and watching that become something different. So I think initially that was difficult for George. I don't think he anticipated how hard that would be. And JJ came into it with such enthusiasm and frankly reverence for Star Wars and for George. So much so that he remade one of George's original movies. And had to find what was personal for him. He had to make it his own. Didn't. Every director who comes into a movie has to make something their own. And they have to find themselves in the storytelling. And then that's going to become a different point of view. And I think that's all George was reacting to. Well, I think possibly that's part of it. For sure, George Lucas does seem to have a great intense, hands-on approach to his project. He did in the past. But I think it's more than that. I think Lucas is unhappy. It's not simply that he's not in control. I think he's unhappy. There's a genuine unhappiness here with how and what the sort of final creation was and how those things were made. So I don't think it's simply the fact that he's unhappy with not being in charge. I think he's unhappy with what the final outcome, the final product was, how the final end result was. Okay. He may not agree with every choice JJ made. He may not agree with every choice Ryan made. I think that's a lot of people would say we didn't agree with that. But he appreciates the filmmaking, that I know. And he also appreciates, for instance, what ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, Lucas's film's visual effects arm, has done in the work of these movies. I mean, there's a company he created, and he just continually tells me how astounded he is by how far things have come. And now, whatever comes into your mind, that can be achieved. And he came down, for instance, on The Mandalorian to see what we were doing. He's worked a long time with director Dave Filoni, and he's known series creator Jon Favreau, and he was just like a little kid on that set, which is interesting. So he was a little kid on that set, but he's not happy with the Disney trilogy. That's telling. That is telling. So I see him get caught up in this again, and I think there's a little bit of regret that he's not on the stage and directing movies and in it still. And that may filter into it as well. I can't really speak on behalf of what George is feeling all the time, but I know that he's very, very proud of what he created. And to see people go and enjoy this movie now almost 20... Oh, yeah, sorry. And to see people go on and enjoy this now into almost 2020 is pretty remarkable. Well, here's the thing. I don't know. Like, are people still enjoying Star Wars as much as they were? It's a franchise that's in trouble now. Anyway. Last question. Is there any universe in which George Lucas can be lured back for some kind of one-off or just to do anything? And she says, I doubt it, but listen, I think that would be fantastic. If he would be interested in doing that again, but I doubt it. He's loving his museum, Los Angeles, the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art right now. That's a huge project, which is going to be absolutely fantastic. It's a narrative museum, so it really keeps him engaged in storytelling. I think he's loving that, and he's loving his little girl, 6-year-old daughter Everest, so he's pretty fulfilled. Good on him for putting his kids first. I'm in that boat, and yeah, nothing beats your kids, man. But yeah, I don't think he would come back, and I can't blame him. It'd be for a guy like him, and remember, he's not young anymore. It's a lot of work to come back into something, and I doubt he'd have the same creative control. I mean, it's pretty clear that he has what do the kids call it? Beef. He's got some beef with Disney over the way they took his creative concepts for what could have been the next trilogy and just pushed them all aside. Again, another piece of source material that supposedly didn't exist. It's like the Ark in Raiders of the Lost Ark. It doesn't exist. It's in a warehouse somewhere. But yeah, I don't think he would come back. It would. Why would you subject yourself to that? So there you go. That's the Kathleen Kennedy interview. It's very telling, as I said. The fact that she starts this interview by saying, or they start this interview by saying she contacted us. This is her attempt to get out ahead of something. So it's possible she's thinking about moving on, or possibly sort of they know now how serious, and someone's told her how serious the problems are with the fans, and they've said, look, you've got to get out and do something about this. But yeah, there you go. So, quick couple of comments, then we'll talk about The Mandalorian. Chris Jamison's channel, one says, so there must be another Chris Jamison's channel. George had a legacy. She put that in danger, of course. He is unhappy. Yeah, no, that's true. His legacy has been whittled away. He can't be happy about that. How do I say this name? Criongenek? I'm probably getting that wrong. Sorry, mate, I'm butchering that. My son saw Empire for the first time, his second Star Wars movie, and his primary question was, how did Darth Vader get to Bespin before Han, where Boba Fett was when Boba Fett was following him? Yeah, classic. That's an old classic question, mate. The Thrawn trilogy, MW77 said the Thrawn trilogy functions much better as a sequel trilogy. Yeah, and that's what I said. That you had tailor-made source material there that it already had a cult following and everything. It's all, you know, you just adapt that to the big screen. Boy, it was like Lord of the Rings. Once you say we're going to make Lord of the Rings a trilogy, you've got this. You've got a cult following that says, "Great, we'll watch whatever you make." You know, it's just tailor-made, and the story's good. It had everything you want. 3 books, 3 films. It's all there. Bramblebush says, I heard they installed an exit sign in her office. Okay, so let's now talk about welcome aboard, all those who have just joined us. We had the Kathleen Kennedy interview. You can go back and watch that if you want to, my take on that. But anyway, let's have a look at The Mandalorian. So now that we've had episode 3, what do I think? Because those who've been watching my channel will know that I had some critique for the first 2 episodes, and there were some issues. Now, let me start, though, by saying this before we get into sort of episode 3 and where things are at now. First thing is, for some reason, some people have, clearly, I can see this in the comment section, people have got the idea that I hate The Mandalorian. I don't. I'm actually, overall, I'm enjoying it. I like The Mandalorian. But there are still some issues there. And it's quite possible to like something and still see flaws in it and comment on the flaws without hating the thing. I think part of the problem is we live in the age of the false dichotomy, where it's like all or nothing. Oh, you said what? You didn't like some aspect of The Mandalorian. You must be a hater. No, that's not how that works. It's not you either love it or you hate it. It's you love it, or you might hate it, or you might love it but don't like aspects of it. You know, like there's lots of different choices there. The false dichotomy, which one are you in? You know, only the Sith deal in absolutes. So yeah, so I think it's important to start out, because I want to make that clear, because it seems for some reason some people have got this, that's their assumption, because he's been critical of aspects of The Mandalorian, even though I've said there's things I really like about this. It's like, this guy hates The Mandalorian. Yeah, so I'm enjoying it. And I'll talk at the end. I'll end on the positive. I will talk at the end about what I really love about The Mandalorian, and because it's kind of become a bit closer to my heart, even though I see these issues with it. So second thing is I think that, as I said on Twitter the other day, The Mandalorian is very clever. Like I said earlier in this video, there is some very clever corporate chess being played. I think probably Bob Iger is directing traffic on this, I'm assuming, but some very clever corporate chess is being played right now by Disney. So I heard someone recently in a video, I can't remember who it was, they said, it's strange that with just weeks to go before the 3rd and final installment in your major trilogy, the Disney trilogy, that you have released this big tentpole television series, The Mandalorian, and there's such focus on that. No, it's not strange at all. It's actually very, very clever. Like I said on Twitter the other day, this is win-win. Because what you do is, if you think, there's a possibility that we're going to have a problem in our hands with this third and final film, even if it's a good film, we've created so many problems with the film that came before it, that even if it's a really good film, it's still not going to be able to remedy all of those problems. If you're smart, you're going to say, we need to get out ahead of this quickly. We need to do something that's going to even the odds back into our favor. So what you do is, you realize, the fan base seems to be hungry for something that feels like Star Wars. I've looked at this Mandalorian thing. It's pretty good. Feels like Star Wars. The test screenings or whatever are really positive. There's a lot of buzz about it. Here's the deal. Let's release it. We'll release. I'll talk more about why it's also quite important for Disney Plus, The Mandalorian 2. It's actually a really important moment for Disney. And The Mandalorian is quite an important linchpin from a sort of marketing, a business perspective for them. It's quite fascinating, really, to see that side of it. But you say, right, let's release this now, and then here's what happens. Even if the film comes out and it bombs, even if the film comes out and it's good, but it doesn't do much to remedy what's gone before and people are still annoyed, if The Mandalorian works, then guess what? We've actually mitigated a massive hemorrhaging of fans, because those fans are probably going to say, yeah, the film sucked, but man, that Mandalorian, that was awesome. I love that. There's still hope for Disney. And there's still hope for Disney Star Wars, so I'm going to hang in there. And so they know that there's a very clever way of actually getting out ahead of a problem. And if the film is really successful, you also win. Because now you get a situation where you get to say, hey, we put 2 runs on the board. We hit 2 home runs in a row. Everything's fine with Disney. It's really good if it's win-win. And if The Mandalorian bombs and the film succeeds, well, you've got a winner. But if they both bomb, and like The Mandalorian was to bomb, what have you lost? Nothing. It's a very calculated risk. And I think I said this to Robot Head replied to my tweet actually the other day and on this point and talked about, and you play it safe. And that's true. You play it safe. And that's what The Mandalorian has done. It's playing it safe. You don't bet large. You bet a small amount to walk away. All you want in this situation is you want a modest return. What you don't want is you don't want to lose everything. And so it's a very, very clever piece of strategy here. And so Anyway, episode 3. So now that we've started with those 2 points, it's a very clever piece of strategy, and I don't hate The Mandalorian. I'm enjoying it overall. Episode 3, what do I think? It's a massive improvement from episode 2. There's no doubt. Episode 3 of The Mandalorian it's like night and day. It's a massive improvement. Like I said in my previous video, and I still stand by this, the only thing of any note and any storytelling importance that we found out in episode 2 of The Mandalorian was that Baby Yoda is Force capable, that he can use the Force. We didn't know that before that. But the way they got to that, I thought was ham-fisted. To have the whole Jawa thing and you got to go and get us this egg. To me, a much more organic approach, as I said in my video, would have been to have him falling off the back of the Jawa transport and then to have a situation where they had to take shelter because there was a storm coming or night was coming or something. And so they go to take shelter in a cave, then the creature comes out, and then that whole scenario, the battle with the creature ensues, and then Baby Yoda uses the Force. That would have been, to me, a much more organic way to do that if you were going to do that. And then you do the trading with the Jawas after that. You don't have this weird egg that all they want is food. It was such filler. Now, someone said to me, but didn't they also in that episode, wasn't there another important point in that episode where it showed you that all of the bounty hunters were desperately after Baby Yoda? And I'm like, no, you already knew that. You knew that. The first episode told you that. Remember? He goes to that villa to hunt down his prey, which he doesn't know is Baby Yoda yet. And what is he told? That there's constantly bounty hunters coming into this area and it's disturbing the peace and they want it all gone. They want their peace back again. So we know already that bounty hunters are desperately after him. And then, ironically, episode 3, which was really good, what does it do? Episode 3 tells us that all of these bounty hunters are after Baby Yoda again. So we didn't need it in episode 2 at all. So episode 2 was just filler. And I still stand by that. So episode 3 is a massive improvement. There were some things that made me question, and I'll talk more about why I think these questions are arising. But there were some things about episode 2 that made me still scratch my head a little bit. Like the question of how those transmitters work. when they're tracking those tracking transmitter devices, the receiver devices where they're tracking their prey. It's kind of, and when they all suddenly went off, it just sort of felt like there was a scene missing there where someone at the Empire HQ said, restart the bounty. And then all of a sudden you're back in the bar and ding, 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 all these things go off. It was just kind of, my first thought was, why is this happening? What's caused this to happen? Is this how bounty hunting works? Because remember at the beginning they made such a big deal out of the fact that they didn't have all the details about Baby Yoda, so you had to sort of do all this amazing detective work to find him. And so if you're going to say, well, they put a new transmitting device in him or something, well, how come the old receivers received the new transmitting device? I don't know. It was a bit of a question for me. And the other one too was that the Mandalorians coming to his aid at the end. To me, there's a bridging scene that's missing there. There's a little bit of writing that's missing there, because the scene where we've all seen them together just previously, they're at his throat. So the guy who comes, Jon Favreau's character, who comes to lead the way, and he does that homage to the Rocketeer with the big salute at the end, which is a bit of cheesy fun. But that character had pulled a knife on him, was about to stab him because he considered him a traitor, basically. And all of a sudden they've come to his aid, and it's sort of like, how did they know? Did he call them? Why are they coming to his aid? Just I don't know. Just that's a question, and I think so. This is the thing. I still overall enjoyed that episode, and I thought it was better than episode 2. And there's lots to enjoy about it. But you see, these are the things that it's still worth questioning. I think we don't have to be blind fanboys. We can actually. Someone said to me on my video when I critiqued The Mandalorian, they said, "I thought you were part of the fandom menace." And I was like, well, I've never identified, by the way, as being part of the fandom menace. I've got nothing against the fandom menace. I think obviously I'm in communication with people who are part of that, and I follow along, and there's some great stuff that comes out of it. No issue there. But it's funny. It's sort of like, again, this false dichotomy. Are you with us or are you against us? It's like the fandom menace is not a hive mind. It's actually really good that there's disagreement, and it's really good that we can also not be fanboys, that we can say, you know what? Because here's the thing for me, my commitment is not to the flashy visual, it's not to the externals. My commitment, I love some of those things. The flying Mandalorians at the end, yeah, it's great. The kid in you just goes into hyperdrive, it's fun. But my primary commitment is not to those things. So I don't just look at something like The Mandalorian and go, wow, it's got all these things and there's that. Wow, look at that. There's a lollipop, there's a flashing thing. Wow, this is amazing. My commitment is to good storytelling, to mythology, to good mythology. Why? Because without good storytelling, I don't think so. Like for me, good storytelling and good mythology is always grounded in what is good, true, and beautiful. And so good storytelling, even if the visual special effects are non-existent or they're rubbish, if you got good storytelling, that's everything. So for me, that's what. So when you see the storytelling issues, to say, well, no, don't critique those because there's these amazing little, flashy external things and plenty of flashing neon lights and flying Mandalorians. I say no. Let's not settle for second best if we can help it. And as I said, the fandom menace is not a hive mind. Let's not be fanboys who can't think for themselves. It's just like, wow, look at Star Wars. Just agree with it. It's amazing. That's what we've seen, by the way, with The Last Jedi, with those who could not bring themselves to critique The Last Jedi. That's what a fanboy does. They refuse to even see what's right in front of them. And they are just so adamant in their commitment that they are willing to adopt a willful blindness. And so I don't think we want to do that. But at the same time, I understand the point. We want to avoid being overly harsh and critical, where it's like, everything sucks. I didn't like the third button on the chest of Darth Vader, that version of Darth Vader in Rogue One. Why did they do that? It was glowing wrong. You don't want to get to that level of criticism either, because I think at that point you're obsessive and you nothing will please you. Yeah. So episode 3, massive improvement. There are still some questions I had. But why are these little things popping up? Yeah, so this is a good point. That video game show says, I think Baby Yoda is reintroducing the concept of cloning to the story so they can explain Palpatine's immense army in uh, episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. I think it's possibly, and I think you're probably right. It's almost certain they will connect it in some way, but I think it's for certain it seems that this is probably going to be a cloning thing. I'm assuming. And to have Force sensitive troopers maybe as well. Yeah, it's that's possibly what's going on here. So anyway, get back to the point I was making. Why do I have these? Why is it there was these sort of little writing things where you go, what's going on? What's happening here? Well, and this relates to my three main criticisms, because I still have three main. If I look at The Mandalorian with a critical eye, and I take off my sort of my young little boy Star Wars loves all the flashy stuff hat, and I look at with a sort of a bit more of a critical eye around the writing and the storytelling side of things. Here's my main critiques, and they still stand. The episodes are too short. They're not long enough, and I don't know why. They've clearly got a budget for this. Why not expand? Why not give us that bit more character development? Those little one or two scenes, it's only a couple of minutes that's missing, to sort of help explain things a little bit more. Why? Why not just, why not give us that? So, that's frustrating. Number two is that, and this is why I think some of these errors are creeping in, this is clearly written like a kid's cartoon. It's a live action TV show that is also like a kid's cartoon in the way it's structured. And I think that's a bit of an issue, because it's clearly more than just a kid's cartoon. It's a bit darker. It's aimed at an older audience for sure, but they're trying to have their cake and eat it too, and this is where they've played it safe. How do we sort of, the kids' cartoon vibe for the younger audience, plus how do we appeal to that older fan base who clearly are quite disenfranchised at the moment? How do we do this? And so it's in some ways it's probably trying to do too much in that regard, but the episodes are not long enough. And that's why I think some of these storytelling points are the way that they are, because it's kind of like what a kid's cartoon would do. The kid's cartoon tends to be more sparse with story development. It's shorter. It's just things happen. They happen, keep happening. Whereas when you think about television, like adult television, it actually it develops the story and it develops the characters if it's good. And which brings me to my third and final critique is I think the story is going to be a bit thin overall. It's interesting to me. I think about what we've seen already, episode 1, 2, and 3. Those 3 episodes, I am firmly of the opinion that those 3 episodes of The Mandalorian should have been compressed into one long pilot episode. That's what it normally would have been with any other television series, I think. I'll talk about why I think they've done this in just a second, but it makes much more sense. Just think about it. If you'd had an hour and a half pilot, and what you do is you start with everything, pretty much everything we see in episode 1 would be there, so that's the first act. The first act ends with the discovery of Yoda. Then we move into the getting Yoda off the planet, and we discover that he's Force sensitive. And you shorten that, because the only thing you really need there is to discover that Yoda is Force capable. So you shorten that part of it, and then you have you add a few more bits to the third episode, and you put them all together, and you've got 1 hour and a half long pilot. And think about where that third episode ended. It is the perfect ending for a pilot, for a TV series, where he flies off with Baby Yoda and everything is now in disarray. None of the previous 2 episodes really end on the kind of what you might call a satisfying conclusion for a introduction to a TV series. Episode 2 certainly doesn't. It's pretty flat. Episode 3, though, what have you got? You've got the Mandalorians are now in disarray, and they have to find for themselves a new home. You have him now betraying his code. He has now firmly wedded himself and adopted the Baby Yoda. And you have the Empire, who are now, he has made an enemy of them, and they are now clearly going to be pursuing him as well. It is the perfect setup for a new television series. So I think that's what should have been done. And I wonder if that was actually how it was originally written. By the way, one thing I really love about episode 3 was the adoption of Baby Yoda by the Mandalorian. That is exactly, and I've said this, you can go back and check my previous videos, that is exactly how the adoption of BB-8 should have happened with Rey. Rey should have, when she was offered that food, she should have taken the food and handed over BB-8, then gone away with the food, with the bounty, and then had a pang of guilty conscience, and then gone back. Something should have motivated her to go back and actually save the droid. That's how it should have been done. And the Mandalorian got it right. What it did was, it didn't have the character of the Mandalorian doing something that was inconsistent with their character. He is not, this guy hunts people for money. He doesn't care about what they've done. He doesn't think about the morality of his actions. He doesn't think about the justice of his actions. Do they really deserve to be hunted and captured and brought back? What will happen to these people? He doesn't think about that. So that's the guy. He's a pretty ruthless guy in a dog-eat-dog world. And the Empire has collapsed, so it's really dog-eat-dog. And when he comes back with that baby Yoda, he acts exactly like a man who has formed himself to be the top dog in a dog-eat-dog world. He hands over the baby and takes the money. And that makes sense. And that's what Rey should have done, because she's living in a dog-eat-dog world as well. A young girl's been dropped on a planet, basically raised as a slave in a brutal, hostile environment. She should not act like a virtuous character who was raised in a monastery and taught how to be virtuous and self-giving. She shouldn't. But that's exactly, she does it without even, she barely hesitates. She looks at the food and then goes, no, I must be virtuous. Like she's been a saint in training all her life. Doesn't make any sense. Especially if they reveal that she's related to Palpatine. Doesn't make any sense. Because she's got that old Palpatine blood flowing through her veins. And we all know how that goes. So, yeah, so that was so well, that was a great little piece of writing. And it's a lesson for how you avoid your character becoming a Mary Sue, or there's sort of the logic of the character's character, how they're acting, how you avoid those problems. But anyway, so sorry, the storytelling's a bit thin. I thought episode 1 through 3 should have been one big pilot. And even if they'd said, okay, well, there's not heaps of storytelling here, we don't want to spend any more time on this, make it a 3-part miniseries, or I don't know, an hour and a half pilot, and then 3 other episodes that are 1 hour long. You know, make it 4 1-hour episodes. But I think the episodes are too short, and I think that's still hindering things. And I think why this has happened, though, why do I think that's happening? Because to me, it doesn't make sense from a TV standpoint that you would make these episodes so short, unless at the same time you're also trying to launch a new streaming service. And what do you know? That's exactly what Disney is trying to do right now. Disney is launching a brand new streaming service. And so The Mandalorian is the perfect flagship. It is so good. Yesterday, once a week, I go and swim 70 laps at the local pool for personal fitness. And I was swimming yesterday, and I was doing my laps, just working my way through them, and it dawned on me, bang, how perfect this was. It just all, in the stillness of the water, it all suddenly came to me, how perfect this was. You have this flagship show of The Mandalorian, and what have you got? This is for a show for the adult fans, really. It's for the adult Star Wars fans. But Disney Plus, when you think about Disney Plus, it's really primarily a streaming service for kids. It's lots of family content, but really you've got to get the kids hooked into it. That's how you're going to make your money, right? But kids, they don't have disposable income. And generally, in most households, kids are not the ones making the purchasing decisions. So how do you get the parents involved? Well, you've got to hook the adult fans of Star Wars in. So what do? You give them a series that is based on, basically, one of their most beloved icons of the original trilogy, Boba Fett. You give them The Mandalorian. And it feels like Star Wars. And then what you do is this. It's not just enough to give it to them all in one hit. And what else is on Disney is not enough as well. Like the Star Wars and the Marvel movies and the Pixar films, it's not enough. Those are all static pieces of content. You don't need to get Disney Plus to get them. You can just go to iTunes and purchase or rent what you want, or other services that offer purchases and rentals. You don't need to go to iTunes to do that. So you've got to have a reason for them to get involved in your streaming service. And what do? You give them The Mandalorian, and here's the real key to it all. You split up the story of The Mandalorian over 8 weeks, basically, or 7 weeks, or 7.5 weeks. And it's perfect. Because what it does is it means that those people, they can't just purchase your service watch The Mandalorian in one night or one weekend and then leave again. They've got to keep coming back for almost 8 weeks. And what's going to happen while the adult Star Wars fans are coming back each week to watch their hit of The Mandalorian? Their kids are going to get hooked on Disney Plus. And the household is more likely than not to become accustomed to having this new streaming service. And so they go, let's just keep it. And the kids go, oh, Dad, don't get rid of Disney Plus. We really like it. It's perfect. It's a very, very, very clever flagship for Disney. There's some very, very clever corporate chess being played here, like I said. And so that's why it makes sense. The problem is, the flip side is, I think that's why the story has been broken up into parts that are just so small. Because I think realistically, Jon Favreau probably had about 4 hours worth of TV here, and they've broken it up just a little bit too much. And so yeah, that's still my mistake. The episodes, and I know I'm not the only one saying. I know a lot of people are saying that they just wish there was a bit more there. They're a bit longer. Now, I did promise you I'd finish on a positive, so let me do that. Let me finish on a positive with The Mandalorian and why I love this. Yeah, you're right, Mr. Eggshin. It is like the old serial cliffhanger formula. And I've got no problem with that. I just wish there was a little bit more to that. So you can still do the serial cliffhanger formula, but just put a little bit more substance into each episode so that you're getting something, you're just getting a little bit more meat in the sandwich between the slices of bread. Let me finish on that, because people, as I said, I'll go back and I'll reiterate this. Let me sign it in triplicate for you. I don't hate The Mandalorian. Overall, I'm actually enjoying this television series. So just in case there's any doubt about that. Yeah, it is like Flash Gordon. And funny enough, that's the original Star Wars vision that was motivated Lucas, right? The Saturday morning serials. And that was the thing that really inspired him to create Star Wars. So there's a beautiful poetry to that, if you like. Yeah, exactly. There we go. That video game show has just said it. Those serials are what initially inspired Star Wars in the first place, and so it's a nice touch. But I think about even other serials. So think about Battlestar Galactica. That was a serial series, cliffhanger series I used to watch when I was a kid. Buck Rogers. That was a serial cliffhanger. There was lots of them that I'd watch when I was a kid. The episodes were longer. There was more substance to them. So you got at least 45 minutes with when you counted all the ad breaks. And I think that's what's missing here. Just a little bit more. It rhymes. Oh, that was a great line, wasn't it? It's like poetry. It rhymes. Okay, so let me finish on the positive here, and then we'll read some comments, and then I'm going to have to wrap this up because I got to get on a plane soon, and I've got to jet my way to another country to do some work. So, what do I love about the show? Here's what I really love about this show, The Mandalorian. I am watching this each week, one episode a week, and this is why I love the serial nature of it, with my kids. It's perfectly timed. So on a Saturday morning, I get up, make them breakfast, and we sit down together and we watch a new episode of The Mandalorian. And what I'm loving about this is that it's finally something that my kids and I are a Star Wars moment that all of my kids are loving, and that we're sharing together. And it's just, for me as a dad, it's almost more enjoyable to watch them watching the show than it is to actually watch the show for me, because they're getting such joy out of it. And from my eldest, who's 12 and going on 16, and she's queen of the universe, to my youngest daughter, who is only 4 years of age. She's just turned 4. They are all loving it. And here's the thing: as soon as the episodes end, they do a lot of imagination play. We have really limited device usage for our kids because we want them to actually have brains that function properly. So they in their imagination play, they've been playing it for 2 weeks solid. It's The Mandalorian. Everything's The Mandalorian. You hear them. They're up and down the stairs. They're outside. You're the Mandalorian. I'm the female Mandalorian. You're the bounty. We're chasing you. It's like, who's going to be the Baby Yoda? Like they are doing what I did when I was a kid with Indiana Jones and with my brothers. And it's so awesome to see that. And to me, that's really good. And I'm so grateful to this show for that fact, that I can enjoy something with my kids and that it's sparking in them a sense of imagination that nothing else has. No other Star Wars film that Disney has released has done that for my kids. There's been aspects they've enjoyed and films they enjoy, but nothing has sparked in them so consistently across the board and in such a big way like The Mandalorian has. So I'm really loving that. I'm loving it, and I can't fault that. As I said, the kid in me, look, the big child in me, who's the the man who's almost 44, about to turn 44. I love those aspects of that show. The flying Mandalorians, and it's you can't help but have these moments of this is a bit of fun. As I said, those critiques are still valid though and still fair, I think, and I just wish that there was a little bit of tightening to be done, and there was just a little bit more substance in each episode. But hey, if this is all we're going to get, I'm what I'm really happy about overall is to be enjoying some Star Wars creative writing and creativity that actually feels like Star Wars. It's Morden Gray says my son has to watch each episode twice, and that's what's happening now. So my kids, I've got to go overseas and do some work, and they said to me, but Dad, they're not like. There's two questions they asked me. What are you bringing back? And then the next question is, Dad, when are we going to watch The Mandalorian? Because we've looked at the schedule and there's a problem here. So that's a really good sign. And they're starting to ask if they can rewatch things. Chris Jamieson said, that you just blew the anti-female narrative that's going on. And that's true. That's what this show does. I mean, look at what happened with episode 3. Deborah, I don't know whether it's Deborah Cho or Deborah Chow, what the pronunciation is, but what a phenomenal, it's phenomenal. And I love the interview that she did where she says, I don't want to be a good female director. I don't want to be a good Asian director. I just want to be a good director. That's the way it should be. That if you actually focus on the art and the craft and give yourself to that skill, everything else will follow on from it. But if you get it the wrong way around, like Elizabeth Banks did, and you obsess over the gender aspect, whether it's male or female, then the art, the craft, everything suffers because it's just trying to serve an ideological purpose. It's no longer being put at service of what is good, true, and beautiful. It's now being put at service at ideological propaganda. And art always suffers when you do that. It gets corrupted in one of two ways. Either your art becomes rubbish, you just produce schlock, because you're so desperate to preach at people that the message that you're preaching is more important than the packaging that the message is wrapped up in. So the packaging is rubbish. Or the other way it corrupts good art is that it introduces toxicity, evil, darkness to it. It introduces a lie. And so you might have, like the Nazis did with their euthanasia propaganda film, I Accuse. You get the top filmmaker to make a very, very beautiful piece of cinema, which has a toxic lie at the heart of it about killing human persons and the value of human lives. But either way, you corrupt what is art, what is authentic art, because you corrupt what is good, true, and beautiful. And like people have pointed to Holdo as what says the Holdalorian is Disney's next project. Oh, wouldn't that be classic? Okay, kids, Saturday morning, get ready to vomit up your breakfast. Oh, it'll be interesting to see with I don't know what you guys think, but it'll be interesting to see whether episode 9 is going to tone down some of that stuff, or whether they're just going to lean into it and go full noise into it, or whether they're going to go, nah, we've gone a bit far here. It's time to sort of pull back here. They've got enough other issues as well around the lack of character development and meaningful struggle for Rey and what's happened, but I don't know if, it'd be interesting to see what they do, whether that stuff is toned down. Jeremiah McDonald says, I remember when Hair Dye was a punk rock story. So do I, back in the day. They have a general pride now. So Holdo is gone, but they have a general pride. Oh, goody. I wonder what theme they're going to touch on with that character. Indoctrination. A Rose Tico story. Gordon Gray says, yeah, it's subversive when something is without agendas. I've come to expect it, and I'm surprised when it's not there. And that's the thing. Like, I think, to me, good filmmaking and good storytelling is an extension of authentic philosophy. And what you do with authentic philosophy is you don't start with an idea. That's ideology. You start with the idea and ideology, and you try and impose it upon reality. You try and make reality fit the idea. That's ideology. With authentic philosophy, you start with what is real. The observable, the things you see around you, the reality of the human experience, the things I experience, the things I see. You start with what is real, and you ask deeper questions that surround the mystery of what is real. Why are they the way they are? What does it all mean? That's what authentic philosophy is. And I think authentic art and creative, like storytelling and filmmaking, is like a twin sister or a cousin or an extension of authentic philosophy. It's about using an artistic medium to touch on, to explore those deeper questions. Even in children's storytelling, it's present. There's been so many great examples of it in children's storytelling where that's present. It's not. This is not an age thing. It's about the actual craft of storytelling and what it is. And so now we've had so much of this. What you had really was you had a group of very committed ideologues who realized, a couple of decades ago, that Hollywood media, entertainment mediums were, the Nazis were very good at this. They realized that this was a very, very powerful propaganda tool. It's a very powerful tool for indoctrinating, for educating, for evangelizing people into your ideas. And so the concept of authentic art really was hijacked, and more it's progressed and got worse and worse to the point we're at now, where it's just so commonly hijacked that when you see a piece of art that's not hijacked and you have someone who's actually genuinely trying to explore the good, the true, and the beautiful, it's quite a breath of fresh air. Like, it is a subversion of your expectations, as you say, Morton Gray. Gerald Mack says they are going to go full force. Rey will be even more powerful, be able to restore life. Virtually nothing is beyond her. Here's what I'm worried about. If they, and we might do a live stream, just because I'm going to go and see this in my local cinema, my local small town cinema, locally owned, give them a few dollars, and I'm going to review it. So that, because I think it's fair to say that I think most people on my channel will be expecting to hear me give commentary on that film, so I'm going to go and see it. But maybe what we'll do is before, a week or so before the film, we'll do a live stream and we'll just talk about expectations. What do people think? What do they think is going to happen in the film? What are they worried about? And I guess just to start that off now, my worry is that they are going to have, as the leaks have suggested, and these rumoured leaks have suggested that Rey is going to defeat the Emperor, and now they're saying he might even be the real Emperor, and the previous one was a clone, and this is going to be the conclusion of the Star Wars story. That's why when in that interview when Kathleen Kennedy's talking about concluding the previous films, it's like, no, well, that's not your job. Those films had a conclusion, Return of the Jedi. Your job was to conclude your trilogy, which is not even a trilogy, just so messy. But, not to wrap up someone else's story. And that's the problem with J.J. Abrams. He did this on Star Trek as well, this blatant plagiarism that goes on with stealing the Wrath of Khan and creating an inferior version of it. We see it with The Force Awakens. And now it looks like he's just gone back to someone else's story and said, well, I'll tell that story. I'll rewrite the ending for that story. Thank you very much. The Emperor was really not there. It was just a clone. So yeah, someone says, Don says, please watch it so we don't have to. I think probably people will be interested. They'll avoid the opening weekend, I'd say, for a lot of people will. Pragmatic cynicism. Man, you're living up to your name. Sneaking the exit. It's the moral thing to do. Yeah, bring back Palpatine. Bringing back Palpatine was a bad move. I agree. And what it does, bringing back Palpatine shows you what? The complete lack of creative authenticity, originality, and vision. We had no source material, so we just stole someone else's source material, someone else's material. Just, there was no vision. And it also shows, bringing back Palpatine, what does it show you? Clearly Palpatine was not there at the beginning of The Force Awakens. I don't believe for a second that Palpatine was part of the plot at the beginning. I think they had to. And the reason they had to bring him back was because of what Rian Johnson did to Snoke. Completely pointless character. Cut him in half with a lightsaber in an absolutely stupid way that doesn't make any sense compared to how powerful this character is and all knowing. All of a sudden he just gets blindsided and cut in half. And so they had to bring Palpatine back. Well, they didn't have to bring Palpatine back. They had to find another supervillain. But the only way they could think of to get the supervillain back without creating a whole new one who's supposedly sitting in the background the whole time, which wouldn't have made much sense, was let's resurrect Palpatine. So it sort of just speaks to the whole problem with the trilogy, really. It's all about the writing. It's all about the writing, dummy. I'm not calling any of you guys dummy, but yeah. That video game show says, if you get time, Left Foot Media, that's me, Brendan, check out Lucas's original sequel trilogy ideas. Would love to hear your thoughts on that. Yeah, okay, maybe we'll do that. And I'm going to try and we'll do it. Definitely do a live stream before we do, before I go and see, maybe the week before that, the Rise of Skywalker, and maybe we'll talk about his ideas in that episode as well. The original director for Episode 9 already confirmed bringing back Palpatine is Abrams' idea. Yeah, but that's true, Alex. So I just wonder, though, when he came up with that idea. Whether he had that idea when he started writing The Force Awakens. I'm not sure he did. I have a feeling Snoke was meant to be his Palpatine, if you like. I wouldn't be surprised to discover that JJ had this idea that Snoke was a Palpatine clone. And that was going to be the reveal in the final film. But then when Snoke got dispatched with by Rian Johnson, he didn't have much choice then, I think. And he thought, well, how do I rework this idea? So I don't know. I'd be interested to know whether it was there at the beginning. Desert Mav says, The Last Jedi was catastrophic, but certainly great for content creators. I wish it wasn't. I really wish it wasn't. I would so much rather be talking about, some good, true, and beautiful storytelling. Yeah, Morden Grace says, I hope I'm presently surprised, but I doubt it. It's sort of where we're at, aren't we? Jeremiah McDonald says, some people don't know what the hero's journey is. It was after watching, Pragmatic Cynicism says, it was after watching about 40 hours of The Last Jedi hate content that I realised a movie cannot be that bad by accident. Yeah, it could be incompetence, but I don't know. I think with Rian Johnson, he definitely thought he was being clever. And we've got good evidence to suggest that he thought, I'm going to do an indie movie. I'm going to take this Star Wars thing and flip it on its head. And I don't think his intention was to alienate fans. I think his intention was he thought, I'm going to open the eyes of the fans about how great Star Wars can really be. And I'm going to show them this new thing. And they're going to realize they're going to bow down before me and say, oh, great guru, give us more. I think that's what he thought he was doing. But he didn't. Wanda Sherritt says, it would have been stupid, but it would have kept the story in the same universe instead of reaching back for this unconnected figure from the past. Yeah, no, I agree. Dave T. Geek, I don't like Lucas's idea. I don't think Lucas's ideas were any good either. Lucas never really understood why Star Wars resonated with people. Star Wars would have been nothing without his collaborators, as the prequels demonstrated. And that's the interesting point. I'm going to talk about that in my video next week, by the way, which I've already filmed. It's in the can, as they say, where I'm talking about the character of Han Solo and what's going on with his character. And it does point to some weaknesses that Lucas had, you're right. And interestingly, when you think about Empire is Lawrence Kasdan and who's the director? I can see his face now. He's George Lucas's old teacher. I can't remember his name. How's that for hilarious? Lawrence Kasdan wrote the screenplay, and someone tell me the director's name. Ivan Kershner, that's right. Couldn't remember his name. Irvin Kershner, sorry. Irvin Kershner. And so you've got these two top talents, and they make the best. They take what George Lucas clearly has a penchant for these creative concepts. but they just need a little bit of finishing and a bit more polishing to complete them with collaborators. And it's great. That's how creative teams work. Good creativity often comes out of a community like that. But you don't have everyone. You don't do it by committee. You have people who have different aspects they bring to it, and it all comes together. Indiana Jones is another example. Spielberg really puts the shine on that character. I think at one point Lucas wanted Tom Selleck to play Indiana Jones. Chris Jamison's channel said Snoke was bloody stupid. Johnson's Trump, and he meets the end they want for Trump. It's quite possibly true, isn't it? Orange-robed man bird. This is an impeachment. It's an impartment. 2 parts. I paused something the other day. I was making a video, and there's this in the background. There's this Snoke in 2 pieces. It's just like, what is this? Morden Gray says, Ryan had an idea with piloting a ship into an armada, which is why that shot looks so amazing. He built the rest of The Last Jedi around it. And it is amazing, eh? And it was almost what I would call Christopher Nolan-esque. I think he was channeling his best Christopher Nolan that he could, because you had that amazing visual, and then you have that amazing, this is Christopher Nolan, where you have that the audio change where there's the silence and then that boom that comes out, and for me it's a split second, but it's a very sort of Nolan-esque moment, and just visually it was quite amazing. That's one thing about that film. The visuals were amazing, and that's why I think it would have been amazing to see Christopher Nolan write a trilogy. They should have really asked him. I don't know if they did. They should have. If they didn't, would have been phenomenal. And said to him, right, you could have 3 years between each film. We want a trilogy. Jeremiah says, any chance you might make a vid about a hero's journey? Well, I'll look into that, Jeremiah. I'm quite busy. Those who don't know, I've set up a new charitable trust, an organisation that I run to sort of fund the work that I do. I do a lot of speaking on bioethics issues and sort of cultural issues and stuff around the place. Travel quite a bit for that, so it's been quite a busy year for me. But and someone said to me, I've got on my list, someone wants me to do a commentary on The Road and also The Postman, and I'm promising that I'm going to try and get onto that at some point. So maybe over the holidays when I'm a bit quieter. Demon Synthwave says, Brendan, hello mate, hurry up and get your music available to purchase. I was talking to someone about that recently. I did some speaking in Australia a couple of weeks ago, and there's some big crowds. I think it was 1,800 people at one event, and I don't know, about 600-700 at another event. And so I played them a couple of original songs there, and I got to conversing with a couple of people afterwards and having a chat about how to perhaps get Spotify set up so some of those original recordings can be heard, so you can go and hear them. Is it Kian? Barron says, Kian or Kieran says, Morden Gray, agree, George should have been the creative force and let other direct the movies. Perfect combo, that's right. It's interesting, you see that change starting to happen where he starts to take more control. It starts to happen with Return of the Jedi, and it's Richard Marquand as the director, but you clearly see in that Empire of Dreams, and when you read around about that film, it does seem that Richard Marquand was more, really Lucas was directing a lot of the traffic there. And it's interesting, that's the film where it starts to come back to, where the collaboration starts to weaken with the collaboration with others. And it's the film where some of those little things start to creep in, because of the 3 films, it's the one where definitely it needs some work. And it's interesting, you get that little thing that George Lucas's penchant, for the first time ever we start to discover it, his penchant for going back and retconning his own story. So Luke and Leia as brother and sister, it's very clear that he did not have that concept at the beginning. And anyone who tells you otherwise, nah. If that is the case, we've got some pretty serious questions to ask about what those 2 characters are up to in the first 2 films. And we discovered that, and then that became a thing. He goes back and retcons his original trilogies with new scenes and adding new content and stuff. He just sort of couldn't leave it alone. And I think that's why the collaborators are so important, because they would have curbed that excess in him. They would have said, hey, no, Lucas, don't do that, it's good, or hey, cut it this way or edit it this way, or I think that was missing. Pianadian says, I think every man who has a young son should watch The Road. I agree, and they should read the book. The book of the, I won't spoil too much of my commentary. The book is phenomenal. It's a very faithful adaptation of the book. I picked up the book and I didn't put it down until I finished it. And there's one harrowing scene in the book that they didn't include in the movie. I understand why, but it's a very interesting piece of commentary. That scene where they discover the campfire the next morning, where that small group has clearly cooked and eaten a baby. And you've got to wonder whether it's a very subtle but powerful piece of commentary on the issue of abortion. It's just the way it's written, and just the nature of it. And I understand why they didn't put it in the movie. It possibly would have been a bridge too far in the film to sort of visually represent that. It would have been a bit harrowing. It's already got plenty of harrowing stuff. The People Pantry was harrowing enough. But the what makes that movie so good is the commentary on virtue and on fatherhood, and the whole question of, the ends justifies the means, utilitarianism, consequentialism. It's not good enough as a moral framework. When the boy says to his dad, how do we know that we're still the good guys? That's really the challenge he's putting to him. It's not good enough. Even if we got a good outcome, the way we got that outcome meant that we've actually now become the bad guys, even if we got what we wanted. So, and it's just such a beautiful film about virtue and about a son and a father trying to teach his son virtue before he dies. Beautiful. You're right. Alex Jones says he definitely didn't. Luke and Leia totally made out. Yeah. That video game show, you should, if you haven't read The Road, Cormac McCarthy, read The Road. It's great. It's dark, the subject matter when you think about it, but it really delves so deeply. The focus is on these deeper human themes. This is what good art is about, as an extension of good philosophy, and it just does it so beautifully. Pragmatic cynicism says, my guess is that all the tinkering has something to do with guilt. He doesn't feel he deserves everything that's come from Star Wars. I think it's called imposter syndrome. Yeah, and imposter syndrome is a very real thing, and I know because I have struggled with imposter syndrome in my own life. And it was only really a couple of years ago I really realised that and began to knock it on the head. But it's a very tempting thing to think that you are only in a position by default, that you don't deserve it, and that you've got to try and appease people. You've got to try and constantly make things a certain way to satisfy people. Otherwise, you will be found out and you will be removed because you're not really good enough. Have I seen The Hunt with Mads Mikkelsen? I'm trying to think if I've seen The Hunt yet. I don't know if I have. I'm just trying to remember. Is that the father-son one? I'm not sure. But I don't know if I've seen The Hunt. So are you suggesting that video game show that I should check it out? I'll try and get some time. I was looking at what movies are on the plane today, and I was a bit disappointed because it's like, they haven't changed their movies since the last time I flew with them. And I was hoping that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was going to be on there so I could finally watch it. Don Christian Markham says, destroying babies, as in The Road, is symbolic of giving up on the future. Yeah, it really is true. It's a loss of hope. I was reading an article just yesterday about the rise of antinatalism. More and more people who are saying it's immoral to have children, or more and more people who are saying, no, not necessarily antinatalists, but who are saying that you should never have children because it's bad for the environment, or people who are saying that you should never have children because if you bring a child into existence, it will experience suffering, and it's wrong to bring something into existence that will experience any form of suffering, which is the antinatalist idea. And it's just vile. It's an evil lie. It's a lack of hope. It's what it is. So yeah, it really speaks to that. Demon Synthwave says, really enjoying The Mandalorian so far, but it has a lot of plot issues. Really hoping that Fyke explain them before the end of the series, as it has the potential to be something great. To me, what this feels like at the moment, Demon, is that it sort of feels like the first season of The American Office. It was just 6 short episodes where they were trying to feel their way out a little bit. So they're sort of trying to feel things out a bit. The character of Michael Scott changes over that first series. If you watch it, it's interesting. They change his character, who he is. He's sort of this nasty, pernicious little boss who becomes quite a sympathetic character by the end of it, by the next season. And it's almost like they're testing the waters a bit. And then by the second season, it became its own thing, and they really sort of developed it in a big way and gave it much more meaning, and to the point where I think it's better that it's different. But I think what they did with The American Office was just so good. So I think The Mandalorian has that kind of potential too, and I think it's just I wonder if they were caught a little bit off guard too by how popular it really has become. I wonder if they thought, okay, this will stir some interest and people will be excited, but I don't know if they realised quite how popular it is. It's become like a little cultural phenomenon moment. for them, and I don't know if they maybe got a little bit caught off guard by that. Really good film. So I'll try and find that out. The Hunt. Desert Mass says, my main issue with The Mandalorian, which is fairly decent, is the same as Rogue One. The soundtrack is terrible. I'm okay with that soundtrack. Well, the main theme, written by the same guy, I can't remember his name now, who did Creed, the Creed movies, and that's why it does sound like a Rocky soundtrack. So, but it's got the sort of Western thing. Alex Jones says, my favourite part of The Mandalorian has been Werner Herzog as the client, though. That man has such presence. He really does. And it's amazing to consider that he's actually a phenomenal filmmaker in his own right. Very experienced and very, very good filmmaker in his own right. But yeah, you're right. He has such presence, Werner Herzog. He's one of these guys who was the guy who died recently, who was also a director and an actor. I'm trying to think of his name. Him and David Mamet, or David Marmot, I'm not sure how you pronounce David. I always get that name wrong. David Marmot. They had a bit of, they would often collaborate together. He was in that movie Changing Lanes, the Samuel L. Jackson movie. He played the boss in that, didn't he? Was it Changing Lanes? Oh man, I was he the director of that? I can't remember. I can see his face, but I can't think of. I'm gonna Google this right now. How dare I do this? But I'm gonna just give me a second here. Hang on to your seats, kids. That was it. Ben Affleck was in Changing Lanes with Samuel L. Jackson, the one about the car crash on Good Friday. Yeah, Changing Lanes. Let me see. Where are we? Movie. I googled Changing Lanes and I proceed to get a whole of road code entries. How to change lanes, when not to change lanes. So Changing Lanes was. Where is the full cast? Sidney Pollack. Sidney Pollack was another one, like Werner Herzog. So Sidney Pollack's an accomplished director in his own right. But he was also, you'd see him, he'd pop up and he'd act in these films, and he just had this sort of great on-screen presence about him as well. Yeah, classic. Okay, I'm going to have to, I think I'm just about ready to wrap things up, folks. So that's a pretty good stream, eh? Okay. G'day, Eben Hawk podcast. Good to see it. Let me just say a huge thank you to everyone who tuned in today for the live stream, everyone who's watching this once it uploads afterwards. I'd take this opportunity too just to thank all my supporters on Patreon and people who drop a tip in the PayPal for me. I really appreciate that. If you like what I'm doing and you want to keep supporting it, I really appreciate that. It all helps, keeps the equipment fresh, and I'm not earning a living, but it's just helps give me that little bit of time that I need to make the content. So if you appreciate it, you want to leave a tip, I would be most grateful. There's a link for that below. And a huge thank you to everyone who is sort of ongoing, has been supporting and is supporting the channel. No matter how little it is. I was reading yesterday actually one of the Christian Gospels was the story about the widow's mite, where the Pharisee, Jesus is talking about this whole string of Pharisees who put money into the pot and say, oh, how special and how important I am. Look at me, I'm giving lots of money, because they've got lots of money and they're giving a small amount of what they've got. Whereas the widow who's got very little comes along and gives whatever she has. And I know some of you, that little $1 or $2 a month, that it's, you could probably spend it on something else. And so it's kind of quite encouraging for me that people think, the content's all right. I'll chuck my widow's mite in the pot. So thank you very much. There's an episode, there's a new video coming next Monday, and then we'll try and get a few more live streams going in the lead up to Christmas. We might even do a Christmas movie live stream, where everyone start thinking now about your favorite Christmas movie, and we'll do a live stream and we'll share our ideas and talk about what we should all be watching over Christmas. Other than that, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you soon on Left Foot Media. You guys are awesome. Cheers, guys.